The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord Jesus Christ. Please be seated.
In our day-to-day relationship with God, hopefully we are growing and we are not stagnated. We don't remain as infant in our faith, but we grow maturely in our relationship with Him. And our gospel reading today would speak the analogy in which our Lord Jesus Christ would remind us and would remind His disciples and reminding us that He said, I am the true vine and my Father is the vine grower. He takes away every branch in me that does not bear fruit, and everyone that does, He prunes so that it bears more fruit. Remain in me as I remain in you, just as a branch cannot bear fruit on its own unless it remains on the vine. What a beautiful analogy that would remind us of our relationship with Him. That we are branches and He is the vine. And that we cannot bear fruits unless we remain on the vine. In which we see that the only way that branches again and the vine bears fruits is by means of pruning, cutting off. When Jesus said, you are already pruned because of the word that I spoke to you. And Jesus said, everyone that does, He prunes so that it bears more fruit. We are being reminded that pruning is important. Cutting off. Why do we need to cut off branches that are not necessary? Because sometimes we are deceived by the trees that they have a lot of leaves, leafy branches, but they don't have the fruit. They don't bear fruit. That is why they need some pruning, cutting off branches. And here we see that pruning is important as we're being reminded that what are the things that we have to cut them off. Ano yung kailangan natin alisin, putulin? Because in the first place, when we say pruning, we cut it off habits that are contrary to the Christian life. May mga bagay-bagay na kailangan po nating alisin. We had to cut them off because they're no longer helping us. Habits, attitudes that are not helping us. That is why, and even contrary to the gospel values or Christian life. Pruning also is a mean or a way of what we call controlling, because it gives us a sign that human as we are, we have a tendency that we go beyond of our limits. And cutting off or pruning is a way of controlling so that we are always be grounded. Human as we are, we know that sometimes we go with our limits. We go beyond with our limits. And thirdly, we need to be pruned. We need to be, figuratively, that we have to be pruned so that we can bear much fruit again. In which we are being reminded by our Lord Jesus Christ that sometimes we don't want to be pruned. Ayaw po natin, no? Because it may be hard. It may be difficult. We don't have to let go of the things that we are used to do. But we see sometimes we are no longer living a very meaningful life because there are a lot of things that we have to cut them off, remove them, because they're no longer helping us in our meaningful living with one another. And here, Jesus is reminding us when he said, if you remain in me and my words remain in you, ask for whatever you want, it will be done for you. By this is my Father glorified, that you bear much fruit and become my disciples. My dear brothers and sisters, our gospel reading today, pruning has a deeper meaning, in which it reminds us again, so that we can bear much fruit and we can live a meaningful life. That is why, wag po sana tayong matakot to cut it off, to trim down, remove things that are not helping us, so that we can live a very meaningful life, as we've been reminded by the gospel reading today. And most especially, we are being reminded by our Lord Jesus Christ to abide in Him, so that we can live a very fruitful and meaningful life. Jesus said, remain in me as I remain in you. Just as a branch cannot bear fruit on its own unless it remains on the vine. Let us be inspired by the very words of our Lord Jesus Christ, that let us always acknowledge that we are just branches. And let us always remain in the vine, who is our Lord Jesus Christ, the source of our strength, hope, and meaning of our life. Jesus said, if you remain in me, I remain in you. Amen.